Well, good morning and welcome to day 2 of our virtual Outlook Spartanburg event. As we talked about yesterday, this event is an annual event. Most of the time it's in person where we can shake hands or fist bump, but this year it's a virtual. And this is an opportunity for us to look forward. We've had a different year this year, and so we'll spend a little time talking about 2020, but most of our time we'll be looking forward to 2021. Yesterday, we discussed a lot about our economy, economic development. Today, our focus will be on our legislative priorities and what's going to happen in Columbia and even in Washington, D.C. So thank you for tuning in to day 2 of Outlook Spartanburg. I am John Kimbrell with OneSpartanburg, Inc., and I am joined today with Linda Hannon. Linda is the district manager for Duke Energy and is also the vice chair of government relations for OneSpartanburg. So good morning, Linda. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, John. Thank you. Good morning to all, and thank you for joining us this morning. We've got a great plan for you this morning. The idea today is to have a conversation with the members of our delegation about the state, about Spartanburg, and about the business community as a whole. We want this to be interactive and engaging with our audience. A copy of the 2021 legislative agenda can be accessed by the link below this screen for your viewing anytime during the session. Questions can be entered in the comment box. And I'll turn it back to you, John.
Right. Thank you, Linda. Let me remind everybody that we know that everybody has a busy schedule. So all these sessions yesterday and today are recorded. So let me encourage you to, if you miss a session or you want to see a session again, check back next week at this very same link website, and you can see all of our content that we had today and yesterday recorded for your convenience. That's one of the great benefits, Linda, of having this virtual. Is that we had the technology to do that. Let me remind you again, as Linda said, this is supposed to be interactive. Go to our chat box. There's three little dots. Click on that pop up. Put your name in there. We will field questions as we get them, so you can have some interaction with our speakers. So before we get started, let me do a big thank you to all of our sponsors. During this time, a sponsorship looks a little different. But we certainly appreciate their support for Outlook Spartanburg. You can see them on your screen. You can see them on the links on the site. But let me name them and give them a proper thank you before we get started this morning. Our gold sponsors on the screen are Denham Blythe, Founders Federal Credit Union, McMillan Pasden Smith, Park National Bank, Purpose Financial, Spartanburg Community College, Spartanburg Water, and Centerra Corporation. Our platinum sponsors are Agape Care South Carolina and Spartanburg Herald Journal. And of course, our presenting sponsors who've always sponsored this event for us over the last few years is J.M. Smith Foundation, NAIA Earl Furman, and Wells Fargo. And today, Duke Energy is our lead sponsor for our legislative session, which is happening right now. And Linda Hannon is our district manager of Duke Energy. I will yield in a few minutes to let her make some comments on behalf of Duke Energy. But we are extremely thankful, especially this year, for all of our sponsors and their support of the work that we do for OneSpartanburg, Inc. And I will turn it over now to Linda Hannon to facilitate this first session for us this morning. Linda?
Thank you, John. And on behalf of Duke Energy, let me say how proud we are to sponsor this event. We at Duke Energy love the communities where we work and play. And we are certainly grateful for the service of our delegates. And we look forward to sponsoring this event every year. So with that, let's get started. We have Jason Zacher with us this morning, Executive Director of the Upstate Chamber Coalition, who will detail the 2021 Chamber Coalition and the Chamber agenda and priorities. Following Jason's presentation, we will hear from the delegation members. We'll have a round of questions and answers, and again, as we go through the agenda that Jason is presenting, if you have questions, you feel free to enter those in the chat box. And with that, Jason, thank you for joining us and thank you for sharing the agenda with our team. Jason, I believe you are muted.
I may be muted. There we go. Didn't look like I was. Anyway, hey, I'm back. As I've only had 6 months to learn how to not mute myself and figured I would learn that after all this time. No, it's good to be back here. It's good to be here speaking to this group again. I really enjoy speaking to this conference every year. And y'all are doing great things in Spartanburg County and really helping lead the upstate in economic development and all sorts of other issues as we move forward. It's been a challenging year here in 2020, and I really appreciate all the engagement we received this year. As you know, as we create our Upstate Chamber Coalition agenda for the following year, we have meetings all summer. We didn't quite have as many this year as we normally do. Normally in August, September, I'm able to get out to all 13 chambers and have in-person meetings. Clearly that wasn't possible this year. But it was great. They had so much engagement virtually from a lot of folks. Got a lot of emails, a lot of comments, and a lot of input. And then we bring all that input together and we do a survey. And this year we had almost 700 people take the survey. That was down a little bit. I think everyone's a little bit tired of taking surveys. If you're like me, you're getting one in your inbox pretty much every single day. So it was down a little bit from previous years, but we still had almost 700 people across the upstate take the survey. Again, the bulk of which were in Greenville, Spartanburg. And so I feel pretty confident that our couple counties were able to help really drive this agenda as we move forward. I'm going to share my screen and we will see how this works because I will not be able to see anymore, or hopefully you can. There we go. So here's our legislative agenda, and I want to run down a few things real quick, and I'm not going to go over everything. Again, as Linda mentioned, the link is there. You can read the whole thing for yourself. My contact information will be at the end. Feel free to email or call me if you have any questions about specific items. I'll be happy to run down and discuss them with you. So first thing we asked was, what are the issues facing the community? And what do you see? And this on the survey, we ask this every year. We give you 15 or so questions and options. COVID and economic recovery was number one, not surprising. Growth and infrastructure was number two. Normally that's number one. It's still there. Healthcare costs, that went up this year. Obviously, I think dealing with COVID had something to do with that. Taxes and education attainment of the community. And I think all those things, with the exception of COVID economic recovery, those are generally in the top 5, 6, 7 every year. So that's not a huge thing. Obviously, COVID has changed a lot of things. And I think with obviously that and healthcare were the two two top issues we're going into. And I think that's not a surprise to anybody. So what's our state agenda going to look like? We want to lower education and workforce barriers. This is something we've had on the agenda for a number of years, and it changes. I want to thank Chairwoman Allison for all the work she did on the education bill in the last 2 years. That was not an easy task. And as I've said over and over, it's easy to poke holes in proposals, and full-on education reform is something we talked about in this state for a decade or longer. And I really thank Speaker Lucas, Chairwoman Allison, and everyone in the House for putting forward a proposal and finally kicking the ball down the field a little bit. And I think you'll see some things that got taken out are back on our agenda for next year, and hopefully we can work on them again. Reasonable, fair legal reform, whether that's COVID protections for businesses or the Fair Share Act, which is something we've talked about for a number of years. Both of those are back on the agenda this year. Criminal justice reform is back. That was strongly supported in our survey, whether that's hate crime legislation that Representative Hyde is working on, or some of these other issues, whether it's expanded expungement, tax credits for helping get folks back in the workforce. There's going to be a lot of discussion about that this year. The House has a committee that's been working on that since July. Boost post-COVID economic development. It's number 4 on this list, but I certainly wouldn't say these are in any particular order. Obviously, using COVID, looking at what COVID has taught us, where can we move forward? Where can we tweak what we're doing in economic development, whether that's white collar jobs or, as has come up recently, and I've been talking with Catherine O'Neill about, how do we change our incentive packages if you're going to have a large number of your workforce potentially working from home? If you don't need huge office space anymore, how do we change what we do to make sure that we can still attract those companies if they only need space for 50 people, but they might have 200 people moving to the community? How do we figure that out? And then address the pension crisis. I think that this is something that's still a long-term problem that the state needs to figure out. And I will say one thing we dropped off this year, not for any particular reason, but just to streamline it, because we only like to have 4 or 5 items, is Santee Cooper. The General Assembly is going to need to do with Santee Cooper. And that's something that is still a priority for us, though it's not on our top 5. So what do we talk about with lower education and workforce barriers? Well, committing a path to increasing teacher pay to the national average. That's something that we've been discussing. The House did that last year. And we got 90% support for that on our survey 2 years ago. Huge support from the business community to do that. I think we understand talent attraction in the business community. I think a lot of folks, we get into the weeds sometimes when we talk about education and what we need to be doing in the classroom. But when businesses understand talent attraction, we understand if you want to get the best and brightest, we have to pay them. So how do we figure out how to pay teachers, which gets us to the next point, which is study the implementation of teacher pay bans. Why are we paying AP computer science teachers the same as elementary school PE teachers? I'm not dissing elementary school PE teachers. I love them too. They should get to the national average. But if we're trying to get Clemson computer science grads, USC Upstate computer science grads to go work in the public schools, they're going to need more than $40,000 a year to go work because they can go make 60, 70, 80 somewhere else. And I think we need to make sure, and I'm not saying we go to 80, but we need to figure out how to give the schools flexibility to go attract the talent they need to teach the kids we need moving forward. And the teacher pay band's got 87% support in our survey. And these are some other things that were in the original education bill, things that I know that the General Assembly broadly supported, but were really taken out of the bill at some stage or another. Deregulating schools, up to 10% of your teachers be non-certified in high-performing schools, making it easier for mid-career professionals to go back to teaching, I bring this up all the time. If you're a chemist at Michelin, for example, and you want to go back and go teach chemistry, you've got all the knowledge you need. You shouldn't have to go back and get an education degree. There are programs out there that do this, but we need to expand them and make it easier across the board. That also supported by about 80% of our members. And offer tax credits to businesses like ZF that are hiring teachers as summer employees. That was in the original bill. It's a great idea. It's a great program. Teachers love it. ZF loves it. It teaches the teachers about what manufacturing is all about, what some of these jobs are all about, so they really understand them and they're not stuck in old ideas about how dirty and nasty manufacturing is. Because it's not anymore. We all know that in the upstate. And then how do we increase education attainment? And looking at changing lottery tuition assistance so that if you want to go back and get a certificate for something that might help you get a better job, can we help make it easier to get reimbursement or state scholarships or other things like that for folks seeking high industry credentials? How do we make sure that we aren't just looking at 2- and 4-year degrees, but looking at credentials and things that folks really could use to get better jobs? And we need to look at some of those things. And I've been talking with Commerce a little bit about that and with the Upstate Alliance about what that might look like. And then Catherine O'Neill's been in a lot of those discussions too. Professional licensing, this is all the same as last year. Have LLR look at professional licenses on a rotating basis to make sure that they're not just barriers to entry, that they're actually there's a public safety need or a professional need for them. This is something we bring up every year. Do we need, and I'm making this up, so don't quote me on this, but do we need 1,000 hours to become a barber? Well, that might be too much. And if you're coming out of prison or you don't have a job and you want to do something, that's some of those professions, very difficult to go get the certification needed if you don't have the money, you don't have the job to go get that certification. Are they really needed across the board? And I don't know about that. There are 44 pages of certifications needed for professions in South Carolina. And I would argue that's probably too many for many of them. And then DACA recipients, the right to receive state licenses to work. That's a critical thing. It's been supported broadly by a lot of folks. We got a hearing on it last year. It passed out of subcommittee, but it didn't make it to the full Judiciary Committee. I'm sorry, 2 years ago. And then with COVID, it didn't go anywhere last year. And then increased access to childcare. I think we all know that's a problem. Some of these childcare centers are starting to reopen, but you're still looking at about half of them closed, and they're expecting half of those to never reopen after COVID. We need to make sure we expand childcare. That's a major, major problem. And it's something that other states have tackled. There is no one omnibus bill that's going to do it. But we need to look at various ideas. Louisiana has some interesting ideas. Minnesota's had some ideas. New York City has had some interesting ideas and things that might be able to be duplicated here. Criminal justice reform, civil asset forfeiture, pass a hate crime statute. I know that we're going to ask Representative Hyde to talk about this in a little bit. 73% of our members supported it, and I would say only about 5% opposed it. So it was really, really small. That's a huge issue. It's going to be an economic development issue. We're one of only 3 states that doesn't have one. Greenville Chamber CEO Carlos Phillips testified in front of the House about it back in August about the economic development imperative as we move forward. Expand expungement, assist returning citizens with vital records upon release. Senator Tom Davis has put a bill in that when you get out of prison, you will get a ID card, a birth certificate. You'll have all that there. So that way you can go get a job when you're released from prison, because it's very hard. A lot of prisoners can't prove who they are when they get out of prison. And that's something that we need to do to make sure we can get them. If they get a job, they don't go back to prison. And Director Sterling will tell you that over and over again, that if we can get everyone jobs, they don't go back to jail. They stay in their job. And create a state tax credit for hiring returning citizens. Ronald Reagan put up a federal one back in the 80s. We need a state one. It's been proposed. It hasn't gone anywhere yet, but we had strong support for that one also, 74% in our survey. There's a lot of things under economic development. Hold harmless for COVID-19 shutdowns. The General Assembly has done that for next year. We need to make sure that follows forward, because obviously COVID is not going to end at the end of 2020. How do we make sure that continues beyond? So if your government shutdown if the government shut you down and you had a layoff, it doesn't go against your experience rating. We need to actively target industries, California, New York, other high tax, I would say high earthquake, high wildfire, low power states to relocate here. That's probably just marketing. I don't think we can do any incentives for that, but marketing. How do we get some of those mid-major manufacturers, the 50, 100-person manufacturers, to move out of California, out of New York? I think there's an opportunity there, and a bunch of southeastern states are looking at this. Increase state investment in tourism advertising. A-tax money is down across the board around the state. It's coming back actually surprisingly quickly. But I think talking to economic developers, talking to the tourism folks around the state, it's a key thing for them to look at. High-speed broadband infrastructure. I was actually talking with ORS about it yesterday. There's a lot of work going on this. That's a placeholder because the General Assembly took some big steps in 2020. but it's very, very important once you get outside the core of the I-85 corridor. Sometimes one of our co-ops in the upstate did a survey, and 1 in 3 of their members either did not have access or did not actually have didn't have access at all to high-speed internet, or very little, slower high-speed internet wasn't at the speed they needed. So that's something to think about as we move forward. Making it easier for employees to work from home, incentives for companies with remote workforces. I spoke for that already. Increased state support for mass transit. That has not changed in nearly 30 years. 80% supported that. Again, a little bit of money in the state budget goes a long way for a lot of our transit agencies. Commercial airport funding for GSP and create economic impact statement for new regulations. These are things that we've had on the agenda in past years. Legal reform, close the state pension system. It's still on our agenda. Strong support with our members on that. While we preserve the promises of those already in the system, provide fair COVID liability and the Fair Share Act, things I already mentioned earlier. With that, I will say, is there any discussion? And I'll put this on here real quick before I stop sharing my screen. That's my contact information. Urge you to please contact me if you have questions, comments about any of these things. We would love to have a discussion with you. And I always enjoy talking to chamber investors about our policy work. So with that, Linda, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Jason. We appreciate the work you do for us. And I know it's often a matter of herding cats, but we appreciate all your work and your research and your contacts in Columbia. So thank you for all you do. At this time, we would like to hear from our delegation. We're going to start out by hearing first from Representative Rita Allison with comments from the House. And then hopefully Senator Shane Martin will join us and will provide some comments from the Senate. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rita. Rita, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
We can. We can.
Okay. I don't seem to be coming up though.
I think you're muted now. Can you hit your video button? There we are. And now you're muted, Rita. Can you unmute?
Okay.
Great.
So you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, Linda, thank you and John both for inviting us to come and be there today. And certainly we thank all of those chamber members that are out there listening today and watching. We appreciate the work that all of you are doing for Spartanburg and Spartanburg County. It is a together push for all of us in this unprecedented time with COVID and all. And that changes a lot, but I think that you will find the South Carolina House is going to continue to move forward. We may look different when it comes January. We may be going into session, hopefully, the second Tuesday in January, and we will be hitting the ground running. But we also may be doing a lot of our meetings Zoom this way, depending on what happens with COVID. Right now, we are in a year, every 10 years we do redistricting. We have 4 members of the Spartanburg delegation who now sit on this Greenville delegation. And that's a wonderful opportunity for us to bring both Spartanburg and Greenville together on many issues. But at the same time with redistricting, things are going to begin to look different when it comes for our House and our Senate seats. That will take up a good movement moving forward in 21, working on redistricting. We also are in the middle, have begun, both the Senate and the House have begun to look at the appropriations bill for this year. And of course, our next BEA will probably come up about February, but right now we're looking at the recurring and the non-recurring monies that we have and how we're going to allocate those through a budget and what the budget is going to look like for 21-22 as we move forward. As you know, we have been working off of last last year's budget. And there's a lot of things that were left on the table for a good reason, to make sure that we had the money to push forward on those things. And now we're going to look at see how best any monies that are not appropriated for things that we have to fund, like corrections and education and many other things, what that any extra recurring or non-recurring money can be used for. So in the next rest of this month and the first part of January, appropriations will be a big issue for us. Jason alluded to Santee Cooper, and of course it's still on the list of things. A lot of research has been done. A lot of things have been looking at. There are those who want to sell that. There are those who want to continue to look and make sure that, you know, how much would you offer, or how much would you ask for Santee Cooper? There's a lot of things that go into that decision, and the General Assembly wanted very much to leave that on the table and be able to come back and continue to make sure that we do the right thing for the state of South Carolina. So that will continue to be. And of course, education and workforce will always be the top thing. I have 18 members on House Education and Public Works Committee this year. Good 9 of them are brand new members. So we have lawyers, we have parents, we have former school board members. We have a diverse group that will be working on policy education issues that come through. We are very attuned to what Jason said when it comes to teacher incentives on recruitment for teachers, looking at incentives that we can give young people to go into the teaching profession, as well as retaining those teachers that are there. We've been talking and working with PIBA, with the retirement system, to look at the things that are already on the books that would allow a retired teacher to come back into the classroom. Critical needs areas, if you're over 62 years of age, those are things that are already on the books. And we're looking at, you know, we want an incentive to keep you there and not an incentive to make you want to retire. So we're looking at those incentives for teachers. We're also looking at the teacher steps that were left out of the budget this past year because we didn't pass a new budget. We wanted to know where we were financially. So we will be looking at hopefully catching up those teacher steps and moving forward, and anything else that we can do in the way of teachers. We had a wonderful reform bill that left the House, went to the Senate, had tremendous debate in the House on that bill, and lots of meetings and talking with teachers, administrators, the public, and all. The Senate did the same thing. The Senate sent us S419 right before COVID hit, and that's still sitting there. And I don't think you will see a big omnibus bill this year, but you're going to see parts of those bills that will make the biggest difference in a short time during COVID, during education. So we're looking forward to working with that. Just this week, our state superintendent met with our superintendents, and as you know, we have testing kits that are coming into our schools. We're wanting our young people to get back in the classroom with their teachers full time if at all possible, but we want it in a safe way. And all of our schools now have been provided with the plexiglass desk fittings, as well as masks and PEE, so that they can safely go back to school. I know that starting today in District 5 in Spartanburg County, all of our children will be back in school face to face. We have found that children are certainly functioning, learning better being face to face. And while virtual has been great, and Jason mentioned that, it is tremendously important that we connect this state with broadband. We've given out thousands of hotspots across the state to our students, but it is about education, but it's also about telemedicine and economic development and tying our state together. And ORS has done a wonderful job of mapping, and now we have provided money, and I think we're having some money come in from the feds too to help with broadband, and that is going to continue to be a big push in the House, is to continue that. We have a committee that is is tasked with looking at regulations, and we know how important it is for economic development and businesses out there on going back and looking at the regulations that are stymieing economic development and that kind of thing. And you'll see a lot of good stuff coming out of our regulations thing. And I think we will continue to talk about corporate taxes and what can be done about those and when we can lower that, and all to continue to push economic development. We do have a crisis when it comes to our corrections with correction workers, just like with teachers. We have that crisis with people working in the corrections and all, and we've had some real outbreaks this year in some of our correctional institutions. So we want to make sure that they too are not left out of the incentives to work and be able to bring about a real quality of life while our inmates are in, and that we don't have things that went on this year. So that is something that definitely needs to be looked at. And I think you're probably going to see a lot of that in the governor's budget this year concerning corrections. But the plate is full. It's definitely an unusual year, and we're like everybody else. We are trying to wear our mask, wash our hands, and make sure that we do what needs to be done to keep us serving you in Spartanburg and Spartanburg County and across the state. So I look forward to questions that you have along the way, and look forward to hearing from my counterparts in the Senate. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Representative Allison. We appreciate all you do, and we, especially for education, representing our communities in Columbia. We're glad you're at the helm. We appreciate that.
Thank you very much. It's an honor, and I am humbled.
Before we turn it over to Senator Martin, Representative Allison referenced questions. We are having a little trouble with the question box. So if you've got questions and you're having trouble getting into the question box, please email your questions to jturner@spartanburginc.com. jturner@spartanburginc.com. And we will get to when we get to the question portion of this session, we will entertain as many questions as possible. Welcome, Senator Martin. We are certainly glad you are here. And as the chairman of the Spartanburg Legislative Delegation, we'd love to hear from you and comments from the Senate.
Well, thank you. Well, thanks for having me. Glad to be here today. I just wasn't sure how this virtual breakfast was going to work, so it's going to give a little bit of a hard time about that. But anyway, I'll be brief. Is this the start, or has it already been going on? Is this starting it off, or?
Jason Zacher presented the legislative agenda, and we're having opening comments from Representative Allen and yourself, and then following that, we will do introductions and questions from the rest of the
Okay. All righty. Well, thank you. So anyway, glad to be here today. Also, I just wanted to let you know, as chairman of the delegation, I did appoint Representative Hyde to be the liaison with the chamber of OneSpartanburg. So I want to let everybody know to keep him informed as the chamber of OneSpartanburg has issues, work with him, and he'll be the one that informs the delegation. So I wanted to thank him for being willing to take that role. A little bit of an update from the Senate. In 2020, we started out, everything was really looking good. You know, I chair the budget subcommittee in the Senate for law enforcement, and I'm on the K through 12 funding subcommittee. And it was just looking like it was going to be a real good year for teachers and law enforcement and, you know, folks like that. But then COVID hits, and only in Columbia a handful of times. And it was kind of scary. It was just an unknown. We went down one time in March to appropriate $45 million for DHEC. We came back. During that time, I was talking about a continuing resolution. No one really wanted to talk about it at that time, but I wanted to make sure that we didn't get in a situation to where we didn't have a budget. And ultimately, we did get that passed. It was a little later than what I wanted to, but we had to operate on a continuing resolution, and that basically wiped out anything for raises for teachers or any stuff for our law enforcement. It kind of wiped that out. So, but it still left us with a state budget. So everyone was going to get paid, and, the budget was going to go on like we thought it was. The one thing, well, before we did that, President Peeler, I want to thank him for calling us back into session on September the 2nd. We were called into session on September the 2nd to deal with our elections. With the COVID, a lot of people were scared to get out, vote in person. We want to make sure all that was handled. And one thing I want to brag on our state, brag on the House and the Senate, Ms. Rita. We spent money a year or so ago to get new voting machines, ones that had a paper backup. And when you go vote, you hold up a piece of paper and you look at it after you vote and you say, that's not right. You hand it to the poll manager or poll worker. They shred it, hand you a new ballot. You vote, you look at your ballot. If it's right, you run it through the scanner. It goes into a locked box for that precinct. So if there's any kind of challenges or any kind of recounts or anything, you actually have a paper to go back on and not relying on a voting machine. And with our absentee ballots, we have a good absentee process. It's secure. We have a mail-in portion that works well. And I'm just proud that South Carolina hadn't had any problems like our neighboring states and some other states around the country are dealing with right now. So after that, we came in and the Senate passed a budget, an Appropriations Act for 2020, 2021. We called it a protection budget. Sent it to the House. They didn't take it up. Again, not upset with anybody for not taking it up. But what the Senate was thinking at that time was we were worried about mid-year budget cuts with the COVID. And we just wanted to make sure that our frontline, workers, our teachers, our law enforcement officers, that they didn't lose any pay during that time. So we put a $500 million reserve fund to handle mid-year budget cuts because that cannot be done by the current capital reserve that we have right now. But luckily, nothing is really going on. So in January, we'll be dealing with that when we come back. Looking on into 2021, we're going to have 6 new members in the state Senate, and one of them is from Spartanburg. So I already knew Josh a little bit, so looking forward to working with him. But the other 5, I'm going to have to meet and get to know, and that'll be interesting because the Senate does things a little different than the House. We're going to go back in when the Constitution states on the second Tuesday in January, and we pick our seats. Everything's done by seniority in the Senate. So we pick our seats, we pick our committees, and we go from there, and we adopt rules, which is going to be a big thing that we have to work on this time. Our committee composition of the Senate will change a little bit this time. Judiciary and Finance, I'm on Finance. They'll still have 20. The two big committees will have 23 members, one half of the body each. But the other ones are going to line up a little bit different. The Republican to Democrat ratio is going to change slightly because there's 30 members of the Republican caucus now in the Senate, which is the most I've seen since I've been there. I think we had 27 at one time when I was there, but now we've got 30. So that's going to be interesting. I think there's going to be a big push, probably for some core conservative Republican legislation to be moved, like the heartbeat bill or something dealing with the Second Amendment. I think there's going to be some push for that. But in normal times, when we go back into session for a 2-year session, a lot of times what we've done, and I'm not sure if the House has done this, Ms. Rita can touch on that, but the Senate, when bills are pre-filed and we're just getting started, there's not a lot to do on the floor of the Senate. So a lot of times we'll go perfunctory for a couple of weeks, do committee work and things like that to not be on the floor because there's really nothing to vote on. We need to work on the committee and let the budget process work and everything. But with COVID, I can honestly see us being there for our first week and, getting the committees formed and the rules adopted and all that. I could see us taking a few weeks of being perfunctory or virtual. We've shown that we can do some virtual committee hearings. I might still have to go to Columbia for something that I chair, but, the members can call in, and our witnesses or the people that are doing the agencies or testimonies, they could either come to Columbia or do it virtually. I see us doing that for a little while. I really don't see us getting to a lot of legislation. I was honored to be on the School Board Association panel. I've been on that for a few years, and they had to do it virtual. Got to join with Rita again yesterday, so I get to see her 2 days in a row. It's good for me. But, we talked there a little bit about Senator Turner brought up, he's working on a school funding committee, and he mentioned that it may be the second year of our 2-year session. So I want to kind of let everybody know in this group, in this setting, that I didn't, and I went back through, and John, I apologize to you. I looked over a couple of the questions, and I just noticed that the chamber agenda was attached, and I didn't get a chance to review that. But I want to let you know kind of what I thought is going to be big next year in 2021. We're going to have the budget. I think we're going to have to deal with teachers, law enforcement, and obviously COVID. We're going to have to deal with the uncertainty of not knowing. Right now it looks like we're going to have $182 million recurring and about 900 and something million non-recurring. But I think there's going to be a hesitancy to spend that money not knowing where COVID is going to be. I think we'll put in some protections to make sure we don't. The biggest thing will be to protect the base of the agency so we don't have to cut salaries of teachers and law enforcement officers. That's something we don't want to do. I think the big items that will get addressed will be Santee Cooper. I know one thing we sent in the Senate, there was just a recent deal in the news the other day where someone who was convicted for the death penalty, and his sentence was up and he wasn't able to be executed because of the drugs. We passed the bill in the Senate twice. Judiciary Committee in the House held us up a little bit, but I think the full House will take something up on that. They were getting close to ready to act, I believe, this year, but the COVID sort of knocked that out. But we've got to do something to where if we have a death penalty case that they can actually go and try that. I know what's frustrating now is, like locally here at home, Todd Colehep, they couldn't really seek the death penalty on him because the family and the solicitor's office knew that there wasn't anything going to happen. So we got victims that are forced to settle now because we can't carry out that death penalty. The other thing is broadband, and Ms. Rita will probably talk a little bit about that. That's the one thing that the Senate and the House is now on track with. I represent urban areas and real rural areas, and it used to be there would be a handful of us because I'm glad my hotspot's working good today because I don't have Wi-Fi or any kind of broadband at my house. But I think that's going to be a big thing that every House member and every senator is impacted by that now. They see the need, especially with some of our children going virtual. And I think it's just going to continue to be a big focus as more people work from home. I mean, even if you work for a business that you have to work from home, you shouldn't be penalized because you might be penalized because you're my neighbor anyway, but you shouldn't be penalized for where you live. So you be able to work from home and have that access to provide the broadband. So we're hoping to get that done. And then the one thing that, and I'll let Ms. Rita touch on this because she reminded me of it. We've got redistricting. So that tends to take up a lot of time. I've been through one of them, and for me, I just looked at it and said, whatever, just bring me something to look at. But I think there's a lot of people that really, really focus on that. And there's a lot of debate, especially in the congressional districts. I don't know. I haven't seen the numbers. I don't know if our population is increased enough to gain another congressional seat. Something some of y'all have probably already checked into. That's where the fights will be, is where those districts are drawn. So generally the Senate, they vote on the Senate plan and the House concurs with it, and the Senate doesn't mess with whatever the House does. So I think those will be the big ticket items that take up a lot of time this year. And the unknown is COVID and how much floor time the Senate's going to have. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Martin. We appreciate all you do for us. Thank you for joining us today and leading this delegation. At this time, we're going to open it up for the whole delegation. So if you do not have your camera on, your video on, you can turn that on now. I want to thank you all for being here and available for this legislative breakfast. Let me reiterate, we continue to have issues with the question box. So before we go any further, let me reiterate, if you have questions, please email them to jturner@onespartanburginc.com. jturner@one, spelled out, one, spartanburginc.com, or you can text them to 864-363-3237. 864-363-3237. Thank you. Now, I think what we'll do is I will call on each of you for a brief introduction, and if you would introduce yourself, as if you have any pertinent comments you'd like to share before we start the questioning, please feel free to do that. Be brief. Following the introductions, we will start with the questions, and I have a small list of questions, and depending on time, we'll get to as many audience submitted questions as we can get to. If you are able to turn your video on, that would be great. And as I call on you, you can turn your mic on and do a brief introduction, and we'll follow with questions. I think we'll start with Senator Talley. Good morning. Thank you for being here, Senator Talley. And if you can lead us off with the introductions, we'd appreciate that.
Very good. Linda, thank you for having us. Good morning to you and everybody that's joining. I'm Scott Talley. I have the privilege of representing Senate District 12, including Spartanburg and Greenville counties in Columbia. I have no idea what Representative Allison or Senator Martin said in their introductory remarks, so I won't say anything yet and just look forward to the questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Senator Corbin, if you will do a brief introduction, and we'll take your lead.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for leading us in this meeting. I'd like to thank Jason as well, and Ryan and John and everyone who's involved in the chamber at large. Yes, I'm Senator Corbin. I represent District 5, which is northern Greenville and northern Spartanburg counties. And I know we're under a little bit of time constraints, so I'll just leave it at that and say I appreciate what you do, and I stand willing to help any way I can.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Representative Nutt, if you will make an introduction. Welcome. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Linda. I appreciate it and appreciate y'all letting us speak today. I'm representing District 34. Which was held by Mike Forrester. So I've got some big shoes to fill, as I've heard probably 20 million times, rightfully so. I have been on county council here in Spartanburg County for about 10 years, and was part of the Economic Development Committee and also Public Works Committee. So I understand a lot of the issues that we're dealing with and that the chamber is concerned about. And I think that having that knowledge of the working relationship between local government and state government is going to be very valuable. So I hope to have a little bit of input, and look forward to my desk mate, Rita Allison, telling me everything that I need to know.
Thank you. And again, welcome. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Representative Max Hyde.
Good morning, Max Hyde. I represent District 32, and I want to thank Chairman Martin, Senator Shane Martin, for appointing me to be the liaison to the chamber. Economic development has been the bedrock of my approach in the House, and I would just like to say that I feel for all the people with COVID. I tested positive last week. Today's my last day of isolation. I've never stayed home so much in my whole life, and I have found appreciation sentenced to home detention. I can't wait to get out tomorrow and return to the station. I serve on judiciary, and I moved up 7 spots this week, which, maybe that means I'll now bring the cookies to the meeting or something. I also serve on regulations committee, and I would just differ with my friend Jason. He was talking about we need to reduce licensure requirements for barbers. My wife gave me a haircut during COVID, and I think maybe you do need 100 hours of training to be in South Carolina. But I thank you. I look forward to the question.
Thank you, Representative Hyde, and I hope your wife is not watching or listening.
Isolation in the next room.
Representative Travis Moore, if you will join us for an introduction.
Hey, good morning, Linda. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Travis Moore, I represent House District 33. That was the seat previously held by Representative Eddie Talley. Looking forward to serving. I'll be sitting with Max. We're already sharing some things in common. I'm also quarantined with a positive COVID test. So I've got 2 more days on my quarantine than Max has, but looking forward to getting out of the house. I was briefly appointed to Chairwoman Allison's Education Committee, so I'm looking forward to serving on that and legislative oversight. So I appreciate the agenda y'all put together and the presentation this morning, and looking forward to the questions and working with y'all going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for being here, and welcome. And Senator Josh Kimbrell will bring us home with his introduction.
Well, good morning. Good to be with everybody. And I'm sorry I was unable to be here for the earlier presentation. If you may notice, I'm sitting in the parking lot of the Beacon. That's where I'm driving from one stop to the next. I want to be here to say good morning to all of you at the Chamber, and thanks for all you're doing. I'll echo two things my colleagues have said. One is for those that are isolated for COVID, I feel your pain. I had it in October during the campaign, and so now hopefully there's some immunity. And then I'll also echo what Senator Talley said. I was unable to hear presentations from Senator Martin and Representative Allison. So I will refrain comment on anything that was said there, and I'll just wait for the Q&A. But good to be with everybody from Senate District 11.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to the delegation. We've already heard from Representative Allen and Senator Martin, so in the sake of time, we will proceed with the questions. Let me remind you that this is being recorded, so that did miss the comments from Representative Allen and Senator Martin. They are saved for prosperity, so you can go back and listen to those comments, and we appreciate providing the leadership they do. I have like I said, I have a series of a few questions. Some of them I will call on someone to start the discussion, but that does not mean the comments are limited to those that I call on initially. So please, if you have anything to add, let us know, and I will call on you as well. I'll try to take it easy on the new members of the delegation. So if I do not call you out for an answer, don't take that personally. I'm just trying to give you a break as the newbies on the team, but please don't let that prevent you from joining in. And with that, I'm going to start with a question, and if Senator Corbin will lead us off in responding to the question. You have seen the Chamber's 2021 legislative agenda. Which items are most important to you, and do you think we could see the most significant progress for next year?
Well, thank you, Linda. That's a great question. They're all important. You know, everything submitted by the members, everything that's vetted through the leadership, it's all important. The fact that we're looking out for large businesses and small businesses is important to me. I guess the one thing that resonated with me was the licensure thing. I'm on the LLR committee, and I'm actually on the subcommittee that deals with state licensure. And I don't know if you know it or anyone knows it, but I didn't know it till a few months back. South Carolina is like the fourth most licensed state in the nation. It seems like we have to get a license to breathe in this state. And then there's a lot of continuing education, and it's hard to keep the licenses or whatnot. I'll give you an example of two that we batted down. We were in a subcommittee meeting, and LLR came to us. They wanted to require licensures for cabinet makers and installers and brick masons. Of course, we beat that back. And I asked the attendees there, so why do you want to license cabinet installers? And you know how these meetings go. They go back and forth with you and dance around the world. But at the end of the day, if you keep pressing them, you'll get down to the crux of the matter. They had two complaints from individuals about how their cabinets were installed. Well, I don't think that that's enough to require licensure for an entire industry. I think the bar should have to be extremely higher than that. I think that consumers should vet companies before they hire them. I mean, we've got everything from still have old-fashioned newspapers to the internet to investigate things. If you want to hire a cabinet maker or a brick mason, I think there's plenty of ways to find out if they're good or bad or somewhere in the middle. So I think people have the right to do their diligence and should, and government should stay out of it for the most part. But I think we have a lot of things to look at there. I like the idea of going through and looking at all the licenses and seeing where we can pare some back, seeing how we can beat some more down that come up that, in my opinion, are ridiculous, and move forward from there. You know, government is not supposed to stand in the way of business. It's supposed to get out of the way of business so we can prosper and feed our families and build a better community. That's what I ran on 10 years ago, and it's always been what I've shot for. And now, obviously, if I'm going to be in the hospital and somebody's going to do surgery on me, I think it's a good thing that's vetted, and there are a need for licensure. I will say that, definitely. But I think that this state is definitely over licensed and over regulated in many ways. So I was glad to be a part with Senator Massey and the others on that subcommittee to stop things like that. A lot of time, and most things that we do in subcommittee, whether we stop bad legislation or regulation, that never even gets heard out in the general public just because it doesn't make the news. But I'm always glad to be a part of a team that looks at business in a conservative way and looks out for our businesses. So that one resonated mostly with me. But it's a great agenda, and I'm looking forward to working with all of it.
Thank you, Senator Corbin. I appreciate your comments. And unless we have any other comments, I'll go to the next question. I'm going to start with this question. I'm going to direct towards Senator Talley. Senator Talley, what do you believe is the biggest issue facing the General Assembly in 2021?
Thank you, Linda. I think in very general terms, it's going to be our response to COVID. And I say that on many fronts. One, obviously, how it affects the business community. I know that many on this call of my colleagues share a desire for the state to remain open and not see any further shutdowns or restrictions put in place. I say that at the same time, you know, we're now faced with what the start of the General Assembly session may look like in January. Obviously, it's the start of a 2-year session. There are no bills that have come through the committee process yet. There are no bills that are even filed until next week on the Senate side. So we'll have to look at our calendar and see how we're able to get to work in January and start moving some of the bills. COVID liability is one of those that I know is important to the business community. There was a bill filed last year that will be reintroduced. Obviously, schools, and we had a lot of work done on education reform that we will hopefully revisit. School funding, as schools continue to propose. I know locally, all the school districts just sent out within the last week plans for students to return in January and how those hybrid models may look. So we'll obviously have some education issues to address as well. And then, of course, funding, some of which will be tied to what happens at the federal level. But we did, at the state level, set aside certain monies that came from Washington earlier this year so that we would have a rainy day fund and be able to fund needs across the state in response to COVID. So I think immediately we'll be faced with that. We've also got some large issues lingering that affect people across the state. Santee Cooper is one of those that's been talked about for several years that I hope we will finally take a stand on and try to resolve in favor of the taxpayers and the ratepayers of the state. So I touched on 3. Obviously, there are many more that will come up during the session, but losing several months this year and going back in the face of something that none of us have ever served under before, I think is going to dictate a lot of what we do.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Talley. The next question I'm going to direct to Representative Max Hyde. In regards to hate crimes legislation this year, South Carolina remains one of only 3 states without a law, and this would you support a hate crimes legislation initiative this year?
Yes, and I think we pass it coming up. Speaker put me on a special committee this year to address a lot of issues that haven't moved much in the last few years. It's called the House Equitable Justice System and Law Enforcement Reform Committee. I was put on a subcommittee called Criminal Statutory Review Subcommittee. I'm one of 4 people on that subcommittee, and that subcommittee has been tasked particularly with dealing with hate crimes. We met, as has been referenced this morning. We took testimony in August. People like the Greenville chamber head, the pastor of Mother Emanuel in Charleston delivered some powerful testimony. Linda, you rightly point out, we're one of 3 states without it. The other 2 being Arkansas and Wyoming. This is an issue that's important because it's the right thing to do. It's also important because when companies are looking to locate, you know, they're going to look at that. So I'm encouraged. We've already drafted from scratch new legislation. It's going to be pre-filed and taken up in the new year. And I would just also like to point out briefly about economic development. I'd like to commend OneSpartanburg, particularly Alan Smith and David Britt, who've just been tireless, Kay Woodward, on the Bring Back the Berg Fund, and thank all the donors to that important fund, over $700,000. We've had a state piece that's very similar with the small business, minority business, nonprofit grants. They're going to be announced in mid-December. From Spartanburg County, we had 438 minority and small businesses apply for the grants. We had 92 nonprofits. There's $60 million available from the CARES Act through South Carolina for those grants. There were over 11,000 applications, so hopefully we'll have an outsized proportion of grant receipts in Spartanburg County. Our economy is so critical, and I had the opportunity to tune in to the CEO social yesterday. I was buoyed by the reports of those statistics that we're doing relatively well, even surpassing some of the 2019 measures, but we're still at 80% recovery, and we need to have some help. So I'm fully invested in helping our business partners through COVID and generally lead the state in economic development. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, let me remind everyone that if you, just because I haven't called on you specifically, if anyone has any additional comments about what's being discussed, please speak up. We'd love to hear from everyone. I'm going to ask just a general question now, and so it's free game. Not going to call on anyone. It's an easy question, but a difficult one. Is 2021 the year we will finally make progress on the pension crisis?
I don't mind speaking of that one slightly, Lynn. I think that's always a big issue that comes up. One thing that we did a while back is we listened to the actuaries. I think it was in 2012 we voted to change a lot of the systems. We fixed some of the years of service, tied it with age, some of those things to try to make sure it was solvent. My mother, she was a public school teacher for 44 years. I know people in Columbia get tired of me saying that, but I'm proud that she was a public school teacher for 44 years. And I didn't want her to go to the mailbox one day and not have a check. So we did a lot of work there. And one of the big things, and it's kind of frustrating, but the way the pension system is set up, it continues to rely on new employees. I almost hate to call it a pyramid scheme, but it's kind of similar. It relies on those new employees coming in to fund it. Myself and Thomas Alexander, who is probably, I would say, the Senate watchdog, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I would say he's the Senate watchdog of the pension system and making sure that we don't do anything to harm it or set it back or take it off the trajectory. I believe we have the thing turned around, and I'll let some other people jump in, but I believe we've got it turned around a little bit so it's on a trajectory now to where it's going to get funded and not be in the crisis mode that it's in right now. So we're going to be sensitive to that. The only problem is you have so many people coming and wanting to quote be out of the system. And I know I'm being a little bit long here, but Senator Alexander and I met with all the big players and the CEO of the Spartanburg Regional. They wanted to try to get out of the system. And with their liability going back to when they got in the system, I may be wrong, but I was thinking it was 1947 when they got in the system. It's a long time ago, decades ago. So if I'm off on my year, don't shoot me for that. But their liability was so much that if they wanted to get out, the bill they would have to pay to get out it's not even conducive to doing business. It's just almost a non-starter. So those are some of the issues, when people try to get out of the system, that it just doesn't work. I know there's an appetite in the General Assembly to get away from the defined benefit and go to a defined contribution, but it's just, you have to make sure the numbers work out and you don't break the system. And that's the big thing, because no matter what, when you do that, or if you shut it off to new employees, that cost gets shifted somewhere, because they're basically paying 9%. I think the employers are paying 11%, and all that goes away if you cut new people off to the system. I think there's a will, there's a desire. The desire would be to cut everybody off, go to a defined contribution, and just make sure it's solvent and protect everybody that's currently in it. But when you do that, it's not as easy. And that's what you said, Linda. It's not an easy question, because at some point, somebody has to pay the bill. And I'm afraid that everyone on the call is going to be the ones asked to pay the bill. And that's what scares me. So I think there's a will. I know I may be rambling a little bit, but there's a will to do something to continue to make that better, and to try to get it more toward a defined contribution instead of a defined benefit, and to ease people off of the system. But it's just hard. I mean, it's very hard. I'll let somebody else weigh in on that as well.
Linda, Senator,
Yes.
had you finished?
Yes, ma'am. You go ahead, Miss Rita.
Oh, okay. I was just going to mention earlier, when I mentioned incentives for our teachers, and it's not just our teachers, but it's law enforcement, it is our correctional people, it's agencies across the board that we've talked about, how we can raise that $10,000 cap. But that $10,000 cap was put there for a reason, and that is all the safeguards that we can put in place to keep our retirement system soft. So what we look at are things that will not affect that in any way. For instance, as I mentioned earlier, there's 4 or 5 incentives already out there for retirees to come back. But what we're after when it comes with teachers and law enforcement and correctional is that we want to give them the incentive not to retire to begin with. We want to make sure that there are things in place that will entice them to stay on the job. People are working longer, a longer age. So to be able to stay there instead of giving them an incentive to leave the system, because as long as they're in the system, that just reinforces the system for everyone else. So the senator is right. There are things that are being put in place. And as we look at incentives for teachers and all of those, we want to make sure that those incentives are done in the right thing. That's why we talk about, if you're going to retire and want to come back into the system, you need to be out a year. And that year is there for a reason, because it doesn't affect the overall. And I think you're probably going to see some legislation as it goes to help those incentives in place. And I want to say before I leave, we certainly are pleased, Representative Hyde and I, on this, that Representative Moore and Representative Nutt have joined us. Both of them are, of course, Travis has been quarantined at home here and couldn't, but they've hit the road running. We're blessed in the House that we're spread out over different committees, not only special committees, but also one of our 6 major committees that we're spread out, which gives us in the House an opportunity to look at the big picture of what government is all about. And I think we all feel what government should do, they should do very well and very conscious of, and then step out of the way so that the private sector can continue to function as it should. And of course, we welcome our new senator too. We're looking forward to working with him. Thank you.
Thank you all.
If I could say just one thing.
Yes, I could see that you were hoping to join the conversation. Thank you.
Well, I know I'm the new guy, so I certainly am not commenting on what's happened. And Senator Martin explained that very well, and Representative Allison. But I will say that when I first met Allison, it was whenever I briefly worked in Governor Sanford's office. I think we can call that Argentina. That was back before all of that. And we had the pension crisis was a big deal even then. I mean, that was a discussion even 12, 13 years ago. And I was at a conference earlier this week. So it's interesting that this topic comes up right now, because I was at a conference in Washington with legislators from other states about pensions. And they were ranking the states on where we stand in terms of our pension liability, just in terms of absolute numbers, and then per capita based on, of course, the size of the state. And as of the most recent numbers they've released, we were number 27 in terms of just overall liabilities. We're in the middle of the pack in terms of unfunded liabilities with our pension plan. And you compare it to the size of the state, we're number 29. So we're sort of in the bottom half there in terms of how many unfunded liabilities we long-term have. And of course, Senator Martin and Senator Talley and Representative Allison, everybody on this call has been working on this before I ever got here. But I do think it's fair to say, and I'm sure it's not lost on anybody here, that if we are not successful in figuring out how to deal with this, whether that's changing the way the defined contribution versus defined benefit, or whatever the ultimate solution is, if we don't deal with it in the near term, we could potentially lose control of it. And eventually that would require the largest tax increase in the history of the state if we don't handle it well. So I'm very mindful of it going in, and I'm glad to see that we still have time to fix it, because we're right in the middle of the pack. We don't want to get worse, but we certainly have room to get better.
Okay. Anyone else? If not, we'll go to the next question. Thank you all for that, for those responses. The next question. In 2017, the Supreme Court overturned joint and several legal protections for businesses. Now, any business with a logo is a target. Will you pass the fair share legislation in 2021 to ensure businesses don't get stuck with legal liability when an accident is not their fault? Again, this is open for anyone to respond to. Any comments? No one like that.
I'll go. I was going to let somebody that hadn't spoken yet go, but when all else fails, we'll chime in. I think a tort reform agenda in a broader sense may be presented this year. I mentioned in my earlier comments the COVID liability bill. That's something that neighboring states have already addressed in both the House and the Senate had versions of that last year. I think that tied to that, you will see a push for expansion of some tort reform. You mentioned the joint and several liabilities, specifically, Linda, and the fair share bill. It's going to be interesting, and I'm encouraged somewhat. The makeup of the Senate Judiciary Committee, upon which I serve, is going to be quite different this year. Senator Kimbrell will be joining us. We have several members due to changes in the Senate going from judiciary to finance. And so I am hopeful that we will be able to take up some more legislation this session that met with a lot of resistance last year. And what I mean by that is just to get down to the nuts and bolts of it. We had 13 Republicans and 12 Democrats on judiciary last session. The makeup of the Senate now, I believe, will lead to there being 15 Republicans and 8 Democrats on the Judiciary Committee. So my hope is that the makeup alone and sharing similar feelings on legislation specific to that. You mentioned with folks like Senator Kimbrell, who will be joining us, that we'll have an opportunity to debate these issues in this session. Frankly, I don't know that it will come up early in the session. The liability piece may, some of the larger pieces may have to wait as we deal with some of the COVID-related issues. But I do think that the makeup of the committee alone gives hope to us and the business community that some measures like that may not have seen the light of day before may have a chance this time.
Okay, thank you, Senator Talley. Anyone else? We'll go to the next question, and this may be our last question before closing comments. But the next question is about transportation. It's one of the biggest barriers facing workers today. The state's funding of mass transit hasn't changed in nearly 30 years. What can be done to increase transit connectivity, not only within Spartanburg, but also to the airport, to Greenville, and across the upstate? Any comments, any question, any responses to that question?
Well, I will say this. I think that, you know, we look often to what's going on in Washington when it comes to, excuse me, to the transit situation. I also think, and this is along the line of a personal, is that this is a great opportunity for our chambers and our business groups and all to look to the private sector. I don't think I'm getting COVID over this, but I do have a little frog in my throat this morning. But I think that it would be good for us to look to the private sector also when it comes to connectivity. For instance, we talk about Spartanburg to the airport, Spartanburg to Greenville, Spartanburg to wherever. Those kind of things can public-private entities that can help move and move people from one place to the other. We have had meetings prior in years that we've talked about using public school bus transportation in especially rural areas of the state to be able to connect them and that kind of thing. It is an issue. It's an issue of people getting to the grocery store. Telemedicine certainly will help with the connectivity when it comes to broadband, getting people to a doctor and that kind of thing. But I think the more that we can work with a public-private entity with those kind of things could work quicker and could work better sometimes for our communities across the state.
Thank you, Representative Allison. Anyone else? With that, I'll just open it up. If anyone has any closing comments they would like to make, I'll just open up the floor. We've got about 5 minutes. So I'll just open up the mic, and if anyone has any closing comments they'd like to share with the group, go ahead.
Linda, I'd just like to say on behalf of the delegation, thanks for having us here today. I'd like to thank all my delegation members that are on this call and the ones that weren't able to be as well. One thing I'd like to add is just anytime you have an issue, and I've said this before, please reach out to us. As I mentioned, Representative Hyde will be the contact assigned to OneSpartanburg or Chamber of Commerce. Please reach out to us and let us know if you've got something coming up. Please let us know before the vote instead of after the vote. That's one thing I ask, and it helps us all to hear from you and hear from our constituents that are on this meeting prior to actually taking place, so we know about it and we're aware of it, because sometimes things come up quick. There may be things that you know about that's moving on the House side that we don't know about on the Senate side yet, and vice versa. So if you could just keep us informed and work through Representative Hyde to keep the delegation informed, I think that'll benefit everyone on this call and everyone in the delegation. And we just thank you for having us today.
Thank you. Before I turn it back over to John, let me just extend my gratitude from a professional and a personal standpoint. Duke Energy thanks you for what you do for this community. And personally, I thank you for what you do for this community. Being a public servant is often difficult, and we appreciate your time, your effort. We appreciate your families because I know it impacts them as well. So again, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for what you have done, are doing, and will do. And with that, I will turn it back over to John.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Well, great, Linda. Thank you for your great job this morning. I want to thank obviously all the members of our Spartanburg legislative delegation that joined us this morning. We had, even with our technology, it's great to have technology to do this. And so I know y'all all have a extremely busy schedule. So thanks for carving out an hour of your time this morning, but more importantly, thank you for carving out many hours of time that you do to work on the citizens of Spartanburg to make this place the best place to live and to own a business. We certainly appreciate your leadership and your partnership with us. I want to remind the viewers all the information that you saw today is on the link for our legislative agenda. And again, this is a recorded session. So please go back and review that. And of course, I want to thank Duke Energy for their support and sponsorship of this special session this morning. So thanks for your involvement and your comments as well. Our next session will start in about 10 minutes, and this is something you're not going to want to miss. We are going to talk about we've got two healthcare experts talking about COVID-19, take a deeper dive into technology advancements, healthcare access, and some insight as to what to come with the vaccines in 2021. It will start promptly at 10 o'clock. So you don't have to do anything. Just keep your screen up, grab you a snack, get up and stretch, and we'll be right back here in about 10 minutes for our next session. See you soon.